I've read over the brief notes, but basically, these guys are aeronauts. They have been to more, flown in more aircraft, and Russ at least actually flies one of his own. They probably have set, I think, a record for this chapter of going to Oshkosh 10 times. Wow. 10 times. I don't think my arse could have stood that trip. But anyway, they've got this presentation about the Italian Air Force Museum, which Kyle actually recruited them, and he showed me something of what they were going to do, and my reaction was, this is going to be good. Don't disappoint me, guys. Joe and Russell Holmes.
Thank you for that kind introduction. I'm the Joe, he's the Russell. He's going to be helping me from time to time, especially answering any questions. So, on November 5th, 2017, we went to the museum, the Italian Air Force Museum, in Bracciano Lake. And it's near Rome, so what I'm going to talk to you about is I'm going to show you some Italian aircraft, of course, and others, how to get to the museum, and it's a combination of photos. Half of them were from Russell, half of them were from myself. I got some pictures from the internet. It was hard to get an actual picture of a blimp or one of these Italian Norge blimps, so I had to use some internet stuff. There's some basic information on each plane. I'm not going to go into the details of it, but it's up there if you're interested. And I'm also going to give a conclusion and some positive and negative aspects of the museum. Now, most of the planes were built in Italy, but some of them had contracts with other builders in Britain, France, for example, the United States. And I tried to come up with a number of airplanes built. So there's a certain, say, 1,000 that were actually built, but maybe Italy had 20 of them, or vice versa. Some Italy built, sold to other countries like Hungary or Brazil even. The slides are organized by hangar and year. So there's 4 main hangars, so there's an H1 up to 4, and it's basically by year within each of those. And by the way, the museum was a former seaplane base. I believe they also tried out some hydrofoils there and some of the blimps that they had as well. This is just a tour that we went on. We went with Globus Tours. We had an excellent tour overall. We went up to Venice, down to Sicily, for example. This indicates where Lake Bracciano is. It's right near Rome, and it's very easy to get to. I'm going to tell you how easy it is to get to, but when we did, it wasn't so easy because we made a major mistake in getting there, so you can avoid that. So we saw all the sites in Italy. I also volunteered for the Canadian Museum of Nature, and I work with what's called diatoms, microscopic creatures that are in mud of lakes and rivers. So I had permission from the Italian government to get samples, so I got them out of fountains, rivers, lakes. So as we were going around there, I was also collecting. So when we went to Lake Bracciano, that kind of combined our 2 interests. So I got a couple of samples from the lake, and Russell really wanted to see the airplanes. I did as well, but he's more of an enthusiast, having flown planes himself. I'm just zeroing in on Rome and how to get there. So if you can get to the subway station Valle Oriella, then you can take the train. We actually ended up paying on the train. It was about €4.50. We didn't know the machines. There's machines there to get them, but eventually we learned how to use them coming back. We got off at Vigna di Valle. 2 reasons. That's where the museum's supposed to be, and it looked very close on the map. But we got off there and there were no taxis at all. It was just devoid of taxis. So we ended up walking through, and we saw some farms and we saw some horses and walked around. We had a nice walk, but it was like an hour and a half till we finally got to the museum. We could see it, and we'd walk around and the road would go around and around. So what I'm saying is go to Bracciano. There's taxis there. So you go to Bracciano, take a taxi, and then it goes down to the museum. You can also get one back. It's quite a large lake. It's in fact one of the major suppliers of water for Rome. As we got closer to the museum, these are the different hangars that are there. So the one farthest to the right has early aviation in World War I. The next one, H2, well, it has the gift shop. Airships, there's quite a display on airships. I'm actually reading a book on Roald Amundsen at the moment. He's featured in the display. Seaplanes, that is a big thing there. Seaplanes, they built a lot of seaplanes back in the 30s for the Schneider Cup races. H3, we're getting into the World War II and post-war. And then H4, Cold War. And we have jets, we have helicopters, more modern aircraft. There's also a few aircraft outside. The main one's the Grumman Albatross flying boat that's sitting out there. And they have a few other planes that change from time to time. I think there might be an F-15 Eagle far left corner, but we didn't actually see that one. So the grounds outside, they had these, as I mentioned, the Grumman aircraft. They had a Piaggio Douglas. Some of these were built in cooperation with the US. The Italians have quite a developed aircraft industry, even from early days. I didn't really know this. And they had contracts with a lot of US companies, various companies. In the lower right there, that's actually an airship monument. They were into airships, building them. As I mentioned, Amundsen bought an airship from them. Okay, we're into Hangar 1. This is very interesting. It was the first thing that I saw in the museum, and I thought it was one of the most interesting ones. It's a hydrofoil made by a fellow named Forliani. And he built that right just after the turn of the century. For example, 1906, that photo there, he was testing a hydrofoil, and I'm wondering, well, what the heck happened to Alexander Graham Bell? I thought he invented it. Well, what happened was this fellow, the Italian guy, got the idea from a British guy and built these things. Then Alexander Graham Bell was on a tour of Italy, came across this fellow, bought a license to use his hydrofoil designs, and then developed them further. As you can see on the lower right there, that's one of Alexander Graham Bell's machines. It was like something out of Jules Verne, as they say. But in fact, it was an Italian guy that had originally developed it. Now we're getting into the Wright Brothers. I was just at the Air and Space Museum in Washington about 2 weeks ago. I've been there a couple times. They have the original Wright Brothers, but the Wright Brothers also ended up licensing the building of their planes to Germany and France. So in this particular case, it says built 60, but they built them all together with 60. But the Italians bought a few of them too, mainly for reconnaissance purposes. This is another one that was designed by a non-Italian, Hector Berlioz. Remember, he flew across the channel in one of these type of planes. So the French ended up building about 132 of them for the Italians. And the Italians used them in the Libyan War, which was just after 1910. Remember, they conquered Libya, became a colony. I guess they were attacking tribesmen who really didn't have much of a chance. Now we're getting into close to World War I. This was an Austria-Hungary plane named the Lorner. It was a seaplane, and it was quite interesting, the original design of this plane, and the logo too. It's very similar to Germany, the logo. But this was an early flying boat from 1915.
It was stolen by some Italians. Eh?
This is an early fighter that was developed in the war by the Italians. It looks like a Spad, so I don't know whether they copied the design, but they built quite a few of them. Of course, Italy was on the side of the Allies in the First World War, so they built something like 831 of these. So they were really developing their air industry along with the other powers in Europe. And the logo up there with the circle, the donut with the circle was the logo at that time. Later on, they switched the colors for their logo. Here's another one, a French Spad. I guess I mentioned that, which they adopted and used about 214 of them. French Spad. This is another one that was definitely built in Italy. Early World War I plane, Ansaldo, SBA-5. And apparently it had a problem because the engine wasn't powerful enough to be a fighter, so they ended up using it only for reconnaissance. But note the winged lion of St. Mark. When we were in Venice, anybody been to Venice? The winged lion of St. Mark is everywhere. And you know where that comes from? In the Bible and Ezekiel. Do you remember Eric von Däniken, the flying machine that came down? Well, it was described as there was a winged lion, a winged ox, a winged eagle, well, they had wings, and another one, creature, and they were associated with the four writers of the gospel, Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, and Mark was the one that got the winged lion, and that's where it comes from. And I found that quite interesting. So, of course, they wanted to have a winged lion on an Italian airplane. Now, this was a Italian-built bomber, Caproni, quite famous bomber, one of their early bombers from 1918. You see the little cage where that machine gun is, right by that propeller? I would hate to be the guy that had to stand in that and fly around. First, you'd be afraid of falling into the propeller, and second, you imagine the noise. You'd have to have earplugs. But that's what they used. Now we're moving on to Hangar 2. We have airships, seaplanes, pre-World War II. The entrance is also in Hangar 2. Now we're getting into a monoplane. The Italians built 113 of these monoplanes. Quite sleek looking. And it was probably aluminum on the outside, I would guess. Here we come into the very, very interesting part of this particular hangar. Seaplane Racers. The Italians, like the Americans and the British, were really into seaplane racing. You remember Jimmy Doolittle? Jimmy Doolittle was into racing as well. At the bottom there, I have just some statistics on who won what. So some of the ones that are blocked off in red are either took place in Italy. For example, they had races in Venice. Or Italians won the race. But note, there's Jimmy Doolittle that won the one in Baltimore. So that's where he gained his fame. But the Italians were also into that. There's a Snyder Cup at the bottom left there too. For one of these, the Matchy MC-72, if you look at the bottom right, it had counter-rotating propellers, which is very interesting. Of course, the Russians, they love counter-rotating propellers on some of their bombers, they have them. But the Italians are really into experimenting some of these things, and they had very interesting designs. That's one thing you get out of Italy, is nice designs, whether it's cars or airplanes, a very sleek sort of design. And there's a guy that's in a tube there that can't get out. I think that's basically a dummy with some clothes of what kind of things they wore on these planes. Another area that was very interesting in the 20s and 30s was flying boats. They built these huge flying boats, for example, the Savoia Marchetti, and very unusual designs. They don't really look like your typical flying boat, but they built like hundreds of them. And they've had these spectacular shows. This fellow Italo Ballo was the driving force behind them. And they go across the world with big squadrons of these Italian seaplanes. In one case, they went to the World's Fair in Chicago and flew all the way there. They have a map there with the route that they went over to Chicago. I guess they went to Iceland and Newfoundland and all the way down. Pretty interesting planes that they designed. I guess they were promoting too, maybe fascism as well in Italy, and just kind of an international promotion. Not to mention their aircraft industry.
They came to Ottawa,
Oh, did they?
possibly on the way to that World's Fair, but they did land at Rockcliffe.
Oh, really? That must have been pretty
And that
spectacular.
stock of useless information.
Well, they have a lot of these artifacts, you see, with posters of these airplanes. They have maps as well, and busts of famous people along with the airplanes in the museum, which is kind of interesting.
You mentioned Montreal on that map.
Oh, okay. And they went there too. Arctic airships. Roald Amundsen went across to Alaska on an airship. But I think he later was lost in a plane flying and they never found him. But he went across on the Norge. This was something that the Norwegians bought from the Italians because the Italians were into this, they called it N-class airships. So they have a gondola at the museum. They had a picture of nobles, General Noble's N4 Italia, which was made famous in the movie The Red Tent. Has anybody seen that? Where they crash on the ice, the gondola comes down, and the rest of the balloon thing goes up into the air, and those guys were never seen again. Then they had a radio broadcast, and some kid in Russia picked it up, and then they rescued them. But that was quite a big industry there, and there were a lot of artifacts. He had a little dog, Tintin, I think, Nobile. He always carried it around in photos. And I think they had a stuffed Tintin, or a model of them, as a contributor to airship aviation, I guess. Now we're getting into some of these trainer planes, a biplane, Caproni, CA-100. So they're building all of these in their industry for training pilots. This is another one, a flying boat one. They built 70 Savoy Marchetti, SIAI 56. Savoy Marchetti were a big name in the air industry in Italy for quite a while. Of course, there's a lot of lakes in Italy as well. Up in the northern part in particular, there's the whole lake district, so maybe they found it useful to have flying boats as trainers. Training glider. They built about 50 of these gliders to train people, train pilots. And I guess it was developed around 1930. Now we're getting into reconnaissance planes here. This is a Imam RO-36 bis Linz. And they built about 617 of these. And that was starting to get into their colonial, getting close to the Abyssinian War. So they're really getting ramped up for some of these campaigns by building some of these type of airplanes for reconnaissance. And there's a model of a guy in a kind of desert outfit there in front. Seaplane biplane. Now this was one that they actually launched from ships during the Second World War, but they developed it in 1934. The Grillo was catapulted from ships. So they were getting quite advanced even with their Navy with some of these planes that they were using. They built 193 of them. There's a rear view of it too, with the pontoon. This fighter, Hispano, HA-132, they built over 1,000 of them, and they were actually used in Spain. You remember there was the Condor Legion that the Germans had, that they sent a whole lot of German aircraft to fight for Franco in Spain? The Italians also sent a lot of planes to Franco, Spain. And this is one of them here. Now note the logo at the upper left there for Spain, but I think they also had an X, a black X was one of their logos as well. So they were able to try out a lot of these airplanes in a battle situation before the Second World War. This is a racer that they built in '39. More advanced, went 358 kilometers an hour. They built about 157 of them. This is the one that we were advertising. This was built 1940. The Caproni N1. It was to demonstrate how a duct fan engine might work. Kind of a forerunner of a jet engine. I took a number of pictures, my brother did as well. It was very, very interesting aircraft. It certainly had quite a sleek design to it. In the lower right, there's an example of the inside of the fan of the engine itself. The reason they didn't go with it, it flew quite successfully. There were two of them, but it just didn't go as fast as some of the propellered planes. So they thought, well, why go with this thing if the propeller planes are going to go faster anyway? So they kind of scrapped it as a result. This is Hangar 3. World War II and post-war. Here we're getting into these bombers. The Italians really like the three-engine bomber. And the reason is they never developed an engine that was that powerful. So what they had to do for a bomber was put a third engine on it. I'm sure they burned up a lot of fuel, but there's the transport planes, many planes that have three engines on it. This one looks like it's got four engines, doesn't it? It's got the yellow engine at the bottom. That's a separate plane. One of the things I found with this museum is they didn't seem to have a lot of space, so they cram in planes. I'll talk more about that in the disadvantages of the museum. So it was sometimes a bit difficult to get a good, clear picture of an airplane without having another airplane in behind it. The picture on the lower right there, I got that off the internet. It just shows you how kind of a sleek design that they like to put in their planes. Here's an example of another three-engine plane, float plane. That was developed in 1937. The Aeroon. So it was quite an impressive looking plane to see if you were on a lake and seeing that thing come in with its three engines going. It was used for patrol. This is the Machi Cieta, 1937, one of the early fighter planes for World War II. I managed to kind of take a picture from under to the other plane. Many were built. There was like 1,153. Now there was that picture right below on the wall in the museum, but it was behind a different aircraft. So I thought I'd put it on this slide because that's one of these planes. And they show the guys, I guess, getting ready to man their planes. There's rows and rows of them. It's quite an impressive picture, but I could never find out from anybody or the internet where it was taken. Must have been taken in the Second World War, but I just wasn't sure where. Here's another one of these big three-engine transports in this particular case, a great big thing. Savoy Marchetti SM82, and a Kangaroo. Well, they call it a kangaroo, but it means kangaroo. I don't know why it has that name. It looks more like a whale than a kangaroo. So they built 850 of these. Amazing, these big, big planes. Now I just wanted to draw your attention to the lower right. There's a little plane there, greenish. It's called the Storch, and it's actually a German-built plane. Now we think Mussolini was rescued from when he was held captive after the Italians surrendered to the Allies. They kind of held him captive, and then the Germans rescued him with a little Storch plane. I don't think it was this particular one, but this has the Italian markings on it. They would have had the Third Reich markings. This was another thing that I noticed with this museum. Unlike our museum, they didn't have any what I would call Third Reich aircraft. Basically German aircraft with the swastika and etc. They just didn't seem to have any. I don't know whether it was kind of political sensitivity, or they didn't have enough room, or they wanted to showcase mainly Italian planes, but that was something that I noticed. This one was probably the only German one, I think. Russell, was that about the only one that was there?
The only one I can remember.
Yeah.
What was the marking on the larger plane?
Yeah, that was, I was confused by that. I think the Maltese, after the war, took it on and used them. And it's the Maltese logo, from what I understand. It's a good question, because I was kind of confused too when I was trying to, you know, identify what planes they were and where they were from. Now we're getting into another fighter, the Falco Reggiana. That was from 1940. Apparently it was sold to Sweden and Hungary at one time or another, and was catapulted from ships. Now we're getting into these longer-nosed planes. There were quite a few of them built. This one is a Machi Folgore. The British called it long nose because it had a kind of a long nose on it. Very distinctive. Now I don't know whether it was because the engine was bigger and they had to extend it out. I'd have to do more research on that. But there's certainly quite a few of them built. This is another one that's similar, called the Beltroll. Again, it has the long nose on it. Note that picture that I showed you earlier. You see, it was in behind this plane, but they don't match up. We're getting into a few others. Fiat Centrale, Centauro. There's two pictures of it there. Ah, British Spitfire. After the Italians surrendered, there was sort of the free Italians, and they were provided with Spitfires. There were lots of them. In fact, they were provided with 145 out of a total of 200,000,
Oh, 20.
351.
20.
20,000, yeah. 20,351. Quite a few. So that's why it's got Italian markings on it. They flipped the color, too, of the Italian donut up there. This is another one that they built, a trainer that they actually sold to Austria, Argentina, and Syria. They started to get in after the war, building planes and then selling them to other countries. So they built about 150 of them. There, again, this is a transport plane called the Flying Classroom. I don't know what that would be in Italian. Aero, Romo, Classroomo, I guess. But anyway, it had three engines. It has, notice the nose of it is very long and thin, kind of, going out. They're still building with three engines. This was a Fiat, another trainer. They had a lot of trainers there, actually, so. Hangar 4. We have Cold War jets and helicopters. The Cold War, I think, officially started around 1947, 48, so some of the ones I'll call post-World War II, and then when we get into the actual Cold War, I call them Cold War. But these are some of the planes, again, that were outside that I covered earlier. So we got the Mustang. So these were provided from the US to the Italians as part of NATO. There were 173 of them for the Italians. Another popular one with the Italians was, well, maybe it's not that popular, there are only 10 that they got. The Vampire. Vampire. I had this prototype trainer, and for the life of me, I'm not sure why they had it there. They only built two, but they had it all kind of in pieces, so you could see the engine. So I really don't know what the significance of it was. And I don't know how many pilots would have been trained on it if they only built two, but it was there. Maybe they thought the engine was innovative.
Easy to get access to.
Yeah, yeah. Helicopters. This was another thing that they were into. Augusta Bell was a subsidiary of Bell, but in Italy. And they built all these type of helicopters there. Some of them are similar to what they used in Vietnam. The third one there. The Huey was very famous. So that was kind of interesting, the helicopters. Now we're getting into jets. The Fiat F86 Sabre. So they actually built, the Italian industries built 93 of these. But it was kind of small compared to the 2,800 and some that were built overall. I don't know why they just didn't buy them. But they wanted to boost their industries, I guess, and build them at home.
Great job.
This is another one. They only built 2 prototype Jetfire. I guess they were trying to design a lot of their own planes at the time, an Aereo. So they built 2. So I guess they put them in the museum because they're kind of interesting. It was supersonic as well. Now we're getting to the Canadian contribution. Canadair. They said it looked like they had some kind of a license to build 179 Canadair Sabres for Italy, which was interesting. I think that was the only Canadian one, was it, Russell, that we saw there? Or Canadian connection? Yeah. And Mary Matchy, this is another jet that they got. They built 135 of those out of 800 that were built worldwide. Now we're getting into American Grumman tracker. I guess they use them on aircraft carriers. And they built 45 of them, which is quite a few out of 1,200 that were built overall. They were for anti-submarine warfare. I'm sure you would get a lot of submarines around there, Russians coming in from through Turkey into the Mediterranean. These are some more fighters. There's a Fiat training fighter and another light attack fighter, both from Fiat. So one of them they had 103 and the other 97. This is Sikorsky Sea King helicopter. They built 2 of them. 2 for service. I guess they would fly them over looking for submarines and rescue.
I think that one carried the Pope, I think.
Yeah. Lockheed Starfighter, famous one. A lot of Canadians flew in those. Anybody fly in a Starfighter? Okay. They built 124 of them. They seem to have a licensing agreement with their own air industries, you see, with some of these designs. They have a famous aerobatic team called the Frise Tricolori. I hope I pronounced that. Italian Daredevils of the Skies, from 1961 to 1981. So there are some pictures of them flying in the air there. And they built 16 of those for their flying team. So they've got one of them in there. There's another one here. This is a more advanced one from 1979. They built 21 of them for their aerobatic team. Now we're getting to other jet fighters. We have the famous British Tornado that was built for Britain, Germany, and Italy. So they had 24 of them built Tornadoes. I think have they gone out of service now? Possibly. Now this is an interesting one. This was a combined effort with Brazil and Italy. The Ghibli, I'm not sure what that means, but they built 136 for Italy, and I assume the rest went to Brazil. Okay, we're out of the airplane part now. Another component of the museum is posters with historical airplane information. The top left poster there is actually all of the crews that flew in that big seaplane flight to Chicago.
Yeah, 1930.
Yeah. So it had all the crews and their names there. Below is a stylized poster of that flight. And you can see that there's kind of this fascist theme in there. The sticks with the hooks, they look like they're for putting jackets on. It was sort of stylized into the posters as a kind of a promotional propaganda thing for Italy and the Italian aircraft industry. Then we have a big poster here which has many World War II planes as well. Now other exhibits. This Forlorni fellow that built the hydrofoil, he was also into Leonardo da Vinci's helicopter models, and he had a number of these helicopter, I guess for lack of a better word, models that he'd build and sort of stylize it on Leonardo da Vinci. So that's one of them there. We have the Link trainer. There's one in the War Museum over here that's identical. It must have been built by the same people. Link people, probably in the US, and they have one as well. Well, left there's some artifacts there that they have, like medallions, a couple of model planes there, different artifacts that are to do with Italian aviation. There's a German Enigma device there. There's also one in our War Museum. Some more exhibits. Some of the other things that they had were air race medals, such as, I guess, related to the Snyder Cup and some of the other racing trophies that they had. There's an Italian astronaut, I can't remember his name, but they had his suit there. We have the World War I flight suit, missing a head. And then there was some kind of a thing honoring airship people, the airship honor. If you look down, halfway down, you can see kind of an airship in that black thing. Another thing that they had was collections of model airplanes. Lots of different airplanes in these cases. I suppose if you had to get at one of the curators could probably let you open up the thing and take a look at it. So we're coming to the conclusion. So I wanted to talk about some of the positive aspects of the museum. We certainly had a good time. It was well worth it. It was actually a spectacular museum when you go there. It's amazing. It was only an hour from Rome by train and taxi if you go the right route. Don't go the route we went. The train was about €4.50 each way. On the way there, we paid on the train because we didn't have a clue how to buy a ticket. But coming back, they had machines that you could put the money in and get the tickets. The museum was free, so we didn't even have to pay to go in. It's actually closed Monday, so don't plan to go there on a Monday. A lot of places the museum is closed Monday. And I would say, Russell, it took about 2 hours maybe to go through? Yeah. We were taking a lot of pictures. There's a cafeteria and gift shop there.
Now, the train broke down on the way back.
Yeah, that's right. It broke down. There's a picture of Russell on the train.
Well, I'm wondering where the washroom is, and I couldn't find it.
Okay. There's even more positive things. Many interesting planes, and they're all first-class planes. They're in immaculate condition. There are a lot of military guides there, and they're friendly, but not all spoke English. That's kind of when you go to Italy, not everybody speaks English, but they do speak a little bit of English. I thought the Italian planes were beautiful and stylish in their design, although I wouldn't want to be alone in the Libyan desert and have one come at me. Tri-motor's popular. I mentioned about the power problems. Lots of plane models, trophies, artifacts. Planes in Italy, through their development, rival the best of their era, both with speed and distance. So they weren't behind anybody, they were right up there. Now here are the negative ones. There's no Vigna de Valle taxi, so get off at Bracciano, as we found out. Some planes, as I mentioned, were close together, so it was a bit hard to photograph at times. And no Third Reich planes, except the small Storch. It wasn't that I was looking for Third Reich planes, but it was just an observation. One thing that disappointed me was the gift shop was not great. Few good t-shirts or books. I usually judge a museum by how good are the t-shirts. I don't care about what's in it, it's the t-shirts that are important. In this particular case, they just seemed to have expensive designer jackets that were like €200, and then they had books that were very specific on some very specific airplanes. They should have had that book that I had there at the museum for sale, but they didn't, for whatever reason, because it covered all the planes in the museum. Russell had a complaint about there were no public phones for taxis.
We have to get to one of the guards or whatever to call for us.
Yeah. We didn't actually have cell phones that worked internationally for whatever reason. They're old, and so it also poured rain when we went out. It just poured. Okay. Returning to Rome, heavy rain, as I mentioned, and the train got disabled. We got a train that didn't quite go to the place we wanted to go. So we're on it, and then it sort of shut down in the station and wouldn't go. So we're waiting around. And I asked somebody about it. He said, "Oh, this happens all the time." There's an Italian guy. So we went to another train, and lo and behold, it went to the station that we wanted to go. So there was a bit of a silver lining there.
Then didn't we get on another subway, and then because of the rain, the tunnel was flooded?
Well, that was the one that was disabled, yeah. Okay. Oh, a word about diatoms. I had to put this in here. They're these microscopic creatures that live in mud, and they're in lakes and that, and we analyze them for climate change, for what the water's like, what the water quality is, and there's some little pictures of those creatures right there that I got in the lake and on the beach there. I got into trouble on the beach too, because I guess there were these signs that said that there was a hand and something or other. And I can read Spanish, a bit of Spanish and French and English, but I couldn't figure out what it was. So I wanted to get my sample, so I went out on the beach, went to the water, got a sample in the lake, got another one on the beach, and this guy comes up, a military guy. We're technically on a military base, and he was waving his finger at me, and I said something in Spanish that I was from Canada, and I'm sorry. Of course, we always say we're sorry, don't we? So anyway, he said, "Oh, okay, no problem." But they didn't want anybody on the beach, apparently, and I think the reason was they didn't want to have to supervise kids going swimming and, this type of thing. They just wanted to keep them at the museum. So here we are, questions. There's me at that station, Valle Aurelia in Rome, waiting for the train, and there's Russell at the sign there. Do you want to come up, Russell?
Well,
Yeah, is there
I
time
have
for your
some
thing?
bonus slides if there's time, if people want to see them.
Sure. Okay. I'll turn things over to my brother here.
Okay, thank you, Joe.
Yeah.
If I could get my photos come up. I had the advantage of seeing Joe's presentation ahead of time, so I looked for some subjects that he didn't cover. And this is one that I found quite interesting, just as you walk into the first hangar, or Joe showed us each one, I guess, with all the World War I stuff, was this balloon. And this balloon apparently is the oldest flying artifact in the world, according to the museum. And what it is a balloon that dates from 1804, and after Napoleon came to power, this chap by the name of Colonel Andre Jacques Garnerin, he was a famous aviator who flew and built hot air balloons, organized for an enormous balloon to take off from a square not far from Notre Dame. And it was decorated with more than, it says, 3,000 candles. I had it all lit up and enveloped in a netting of raw silk from which a large, heavy imperial eagle was hung. And so for the festivities, this Garnerin took a number of measures to ensure the balloon would be returned to him after it had been launched. And he had in letters and stuff like that. But anyway, the hardly had the balloon lifted off when at the height of the dome of the cathedral, the wind blew out all of the candles. And then Napoleon immediately regarded this as an ill omen, and from that point on took violent dislike to hot air balloons and to Garnerin, with whom he broke off relations. But then after more than 22 hours of flight and carried by strong winds, the balloon reached the outskirts of Rome, where it almost completely deflated. It hit the tomb of Publius Vibius Marianus, wrongly thought at the time to be the burial monument of Nero, the Roman emperor. There it lost the imperial eagle, and so now it was less heavy, so it took off again. And it came down in Lake Bracciano, where the on the shores of where the museum was built. So anyway, it was picked up by local fishermen and taken to the Vatican, where it was preserved for 170 years. And then in 1978, as a sign of his appreciation and gratitude, His Holiness Pope Paul VI, the first pope ever to have flown in an Air Force plane, donated it to the Air Force in advance of the building of the museum. So I thought that was kind of neat, and thought you might enjoy the story behind that.
So how big is what we're seeing there?
Well, it doesn't look. Yeah, I know. It doesn't look like it would be big enough.
Are we talking about something that's like, that case 20 feet high, 5 feet high?
No. That case was, I don't know, maybe 7 or 8 feet high. Yeah. You know. It's hard to imagine something that big, but in that case. But I guess it was. You know, I don't know. Maybe let's try this. No, it doesn't work. Next.
Press the blue button, or the green button.
Oh, the green? It says off. Oh, the big, okay.
Yeah.
Well, Joe covered the Wright Flyer, and it was made in France under license, because Wilbur came over and licensed it. So some things I wanted to, it had the motor here, the engine, and the write-up. I took pictures of all of the text placards. And the airplane is a replica, but it has some of the original parts of the airplane that was used to train, such as the fuel tank, the propellers, and the engine still works according to the write-up. Now, Francesco Baracca, he was the top ace for the Italians in World War I. He had 34 victories. And so I found him kind of interesting. This suit was his, and right beside it you see this little placard here. And what it's talking about is on the side of the plane. He originally was in a cavalry unit, and the crest or symbol of that unit was this prancing pony, the Cavallino Rampante, the prancing horse on a red background, looking toward the left with its tail pointing downward. Now he got out of the cavalry and got into flying, and became their top ace, mostly in 1917. And then in 1918, he was on a mission over, where is it, Montello. And he was shot down, and there's a controversy over that, whether it was ground fire or another plane. But anyway, so he was killed. And and he had adopted that emblem on his airplanes, as many did then. And then when Enzo Ferrari won the first circuit in Ravenna in 1923, he came across Count Enrico Baracca, Francesco's father, whom he had already met in Bologna some time before. That second encounter, as Ferrari himself wrote on the 3rd of July 1985, gave rise to yet another meeting, this time with Francesco's mother, Countess Paolina Biancoli. This is what she said to me one day, wrote Ferrari. Ferrari, use my son's prancing horse on your cars. It will bring you good luck. I still have Baracca's photograph with his parents' dedication and trusting his emblem to me, concluded Ferrari. The horse was and has remained black, but I added the canary yellow background, the color of Medina. And so, according to authoritative testimonials, Enzo Ferrari's choice was driven by a love of Giovanni Pascoli's poem La Cavallina Storna and a great admiration for Francesco Baracca, which dated back to his adolescent years. So that's the story of the pony on Ferrari. Came from that fighter. And this is the engine from the airplane it was in. It was a Spad. And they also had a machine gun. So I thought you'd be interested in that story of him. Now this, I love this airplane, the Ansaldo SVA. And here they had this picture of this chap, and I went, well, who was he? So he, as you can see, Antonio Locatelli. And so he the plane was mainly used for reconnaissance missions during the Great War, becoming legendary among pilots for some of the memorable flights. First of all, the one over Vienna on the 9th of August, 1918, made by 11 SVAs from San Pelagio under the orders of nationalist Gabriele D'Annunzio. And the aircraft on exhibit was one of the aircraft that participated in the flight to Vienna, dropping leaflets inviting the Austrians to surrender. Anyway, after the war, 2 other SVAs flew from Rome to Tokyo on a fantastic 18,000-kilometer flight, while another one, piloted by Antonio Locatelli, flew across the Andes from Buenos Aires to Santiago, back to Buenos Aires. So 710 miles each way. And the Andes have an average height of like 13,000 feet. These airplanes are quite fast. I read that they would go like 143 miles an hour with their 230 horsepower engines, and they go 149 miles an hour with the 250 horsepower engines. But anyway, this Locatelli was born in 1895 in Bergamo, Italy, and he was granted his pilot's license in 1915. He went on to fly 523 sorties during World War I, starting out in reconnaissance and then flying fighters and bombers. But he was particularly celebrated in performing solo reconnaissance over Zeppelin yards in Friedrichshafen and flying over Vienna on the 9th of July, 1918. But he was subsequently shot down and captured by the Germans. But anyway, he survived the war, and then he also led Italy's attempt to achieve the first aerial circumnavigation during the 1924 scramble by 6 nations to achieve that feat. So he flew a metal-hulled Dornier Duo J Val flying boat with a crew of 3, and they left Pisa, Italy on the 25th of July, heading west to form a transatlantic flight to Canada. And the aircraft made stops before that, but ended up at Reykjavik, where the Americans were with their Douglas World Cruisers. Chicago and New Orleans were the surviving ones at that time. And so there was also the Italian pilot Antonio Locatelli's Dornier Val. So they were all in the running to be the first around the globe. And then on August 21st, accepting an invitation to fly with the Americans so the Italians could benefit from the protection of the U.S. Navy cruisers and destroyers, Locatelli and the 2 American aircraft departed Iceland together. And Locatelli did his best to stay with the slower Douglas World Cruisers, but soon he had shot off ahead of those 2, the Chicago and the New Orleans. But while flying over the Sea of Labrador, some 180 miles south of Cape Farewell, Greenland, the crew encountered engine problems and elected to make an emergency landing. The twin-engine seaplane landed safely, and the crew sent several mayday messages, and the crew was later rescued by the crew of the USS Richmond, which deviated from its route to the accident site. But in a rough sea, the seaplane sunk later and was lost and not recovered. But anyway, there's some other pictures that Joe didn't have of the SVA I thought were quite interesting. And you can see the narrow front on it and the curved fuselage, triangular shape at the back. And I just think it's a cool airplane. I fly Monday nights, rubber power, and Paul Penn has made a little, called an OCal, very thin one, and it flies just great in the gym. And yeah, some close-up shots. And this is the Dornier valve that they flew. Found that on Wikipedia. And some other shots of the Caproni. I know that in it, the American where is it? Fiorello LaGuardia flew one of those for the Americans. I guess a French made one. I think the French made them under license. And this is the bust here is Caproni. But what a treasure that airplane is. They have this little window, you can see the seat. Landing gear. And another shot of the other side of the poor gunner. Up there in the cold slipstream, trying not to get his hand caught in the propeller. And I think Joe had that shot of there. So another one of this. The story was it was stolen by a couple of Italians and brought over to Italy. A couple more shots of it. Then you get to Italo Balbo. Kind of gone ahead, haven't we? And they have a nice picture of the Savoy Marchetti and some very nice models.
A cafeteria?
A cafeteria where we had lunch. And then, of course, the mass flights. And they started off in 1928 with this one, Italy out to Spain and back, and showing how many airplanes were involved. And then they had another one in 1929 from Italy down to Greece and then up to Turkey and into the Black Sea and back. And 1930-31 they flew over to Rio de Janeiro, across the Atlantic. And they show all of the crews. I guess they had a red flight and a white flight and a green flight. And this is the one over to North America. And there was up in, let's see if I can find that. Yeah, they landed went from Reykjavik to Cartwright in Labrador and Shediac, and Montreal, ending on Lake Michigan near Burnham Park. And it was quite a deal. Mussolini donated a column from Austria to the city of Chicago. The Balboa Monument still can be seen along the lakefront trail, a little south of Soldier Field. Chicago renamed the former 7th Street Balboa Drive and staged a great parade in his honor. The Newfoundland Post Office overprinted one of their 75-cent airmail stamps that had been issued just 2 months previously for the event. And then from Chicago, they flew to New York with an escort of 36 U.S. airplanes. New York gave a warm welcome to the pilots on Broadway. Millions of people watched the parade of dozens of cars escorted by police horses along the streets of Manhattan. And Balboa was featured on the 26th of June 1933 cover of Time magazine. During his stay in the U.S., President Franklin Roosevelt invited him to lunch and presented him with the Distinguished Flying Cross. He was awarded the 1931 Harmon Trophy. He received a warm welcome in the United States, especially by the large Italian-American populations in Chicago. And the term Balboa entered common usage to describe any large formation of aircraft. And then on a return flight, they stopped in Shoal Harbor at Clarenville, Newfoundland on the 26th of July. And a road overlooking the bay used by the flying boats was renamed Balboa Drive, a name it still carries today. So, anyway, I just wanted to add a few, and there are pictures of the man involved in 1933. And then they had this picture. Well, you wonder what happened to all these planes, eh? You know, you'd wish you didn't see one in the museum, just these models. Well, there's only a few pieces left. And this shows what they are, a section of one of the pontoons, an engine, and a rudder. So there is the piece of the pontoon, or fuselage. And then there is the rudder and propeller and an engine beside, and I guess that picture Joe showed earlier. And then we get to when I saw these planes, I thought, man, I'm so glad I went there. I just love these planes, and I thought I'd show a few more pictures than Joe had shown.
That's the counter-rotating one at the front, the first one.
Yeah.
Counter-rotating propeller.
That's not the one that won the Schneider. This one that won the Schneider was the M39 in 1926. Fortunately, that was the only bad picture I think my camera's ever taken. It's a little blurry, so I got one off of Wikipedia there. But that one won in 1926. I'm just looking for anything interesting in here that...
What day of the week were you there?
Well,
It was during the week, right?
Yeah.
Well,
was it a Sunday? Might have been a Sunday.
well, the date will be on some of these
It's
photos.
closed on Mondays, so,
Yeah.
okay, yeah.
I was just
Avoid
looking at the
Monday.
crowd, but the crowd in the place, there's people, but not a lot.
No, there weren't that many.
Anyway, he took first place, 246 miles an hour, setting a new speed record for seaplanes. And then 4 days later, he even bettered that. And then some close-ups here. The planes are incredibly smooth. They also, Joe didn't show the Fiat. There's a Fiat there. And this is it here. And that was for the 1929 Schneider Trophy race. But it was unused in the race. Of the 3 aircraft built, 2 were destroyed in flying accidents, while the 3rd is on display in the museum. And I thought that was, quite a neat view of the front of that. And then one of the engines. And the Macchi M67. That also was for the 1929 Schneider Trophy race. Took place in Calshot Spit in the UK and began in September of 29. I have quite a long write-up. I don't want to read it all out to you. But they didn't win. I'm just looking for something.
Russ, do you know anything about the engine in that aircraft? Because it looks like the one in the middle at the back.
That one there.
Yeah, it's a W18.
Ah.
So it's got another row in the middle. I don't know what the crankshaft will look like on that thing, but yeah. Yeah. Unfortunately, I'm not an Italian aircraft expert, so I go to the museum and see all these nice planes. So
We are now.
I'm trying to scramble here to fill in a bit of the details, but I got quite a bit off Wikipedia today, but I don't have it committed to memory. But okay, but after that race, it was kind of interesting. They didn't win with the M67 either, but Balbo said, "We have finished playing our part as sportsmen. Tomorrow, our work as competitors will begin." So signaling Italy's intention to be more competitive in the next Schneider Trophy race. So this is another engine. I'm not sure which one. This is the 67 from another angle. And they have these radiators right on the floats. And they did things like, I can't remember which one, it would have the wing a little longer to help with the turn, and it would have fuel in the pontoons, it would have fuel in one side more than the other to help compensate for the torque. They're quite innovative. And then this is the the ultimate one, the Mach-E MC-72 with the counter-rotating propellers. And some of the, around the engine and that is cooling for oil, and then other ones are cooling for the radiator. And I read that it could also have another turret underneath if it needed to. There's a tired traveler there taking a break. But what an engine. Look at this engine, eh? Wouldn't want to pay for the overhaul on that one.
I'm curious if they could develop such fine engines for the racers, and yet they couldn't develop powerful engines and powerful enough for the transports. So they had to use 3 engines.
Now this airplane, it held the speed record for all airplanes for 5 years, and but it also has set the speed record for piston engine powered seaplanes, which still stands.
How many cylinders in that? Was it 24? Is it like 212s or is it a W?
Let's go, can we go back? Okay, there we got.
Tired traveler.
We got, I'd say 24, two sets of 12. Oh, here we are, okay. Yeah, England won the cup. This thing had problems, I guess.
Would they have had the forerunner of the Supermarine Spitfire? Because it was developed as a seaplane, so. maybe
Well, it was
they had
the British, right?
Yeah.
With the air entry.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, anyway, well worth seeing those Schneider Trophy racers. This is one in a model in a display case, and it seems to have hydrofoil, so the designer was working on something with hydrofoils, it looks like. But the Schneider Trophy ended. Britain had won, what, 5 in a row or something like that, and they retired. And here, Caproni Capini. Now, Joe had covered that a bit, but he didn't have this. This is, I found this on eBay. Somebody's selling this little newspaper clipping. And it says, fascists reported today that Italy's new mystery plane reached a speed of 625 miles an hour when tested by Colonel Mario de Bernardi, famed Italian racing pilot. The plane, which has no propeller, runs on compressed gas, according to information here. It was reported that the plane was invented by Secondo Capini, 36, an engineer at the Caproni Airworks, who has hopes that it will eventually attain a speed of 3,000 miles an hour in the stratosphere. Okay, and Premier Benito Mussolini personally facilitated the experiments and conferred with Capini. The model being tested is intended for commercial use across the Atlantic as well as for war use. The Milan, I knew you'd enjoy this. The Milan newspaper, Sarah said that Italy's new mystery plane was operated by compressed gas and did not have either a motor or propeller. Boy, with you. But anyway, this is a model inside, and it had, behind the fan blades, it had the radiator, so that would increase the heat, and then you have the engine, and then you have the fact that it's trying to compress, so that would increase the heat. So apparently it was a hot airplane to fly. And they have a picture of it flying with the canopies open. And that was the turbine blade out of it. And a picture of it running there on the ground. And the tail. And then I found this, I have a book, The Chronicle of Aviation. So here they bring everybody down to reality. This is still from 1940. Today a strange airplane was flown for the first time from this airfield near Milan, known as the N1. It was built by Italian makers Caproni to test a method of jet propulsion, which has been invented by Secondo Capini. In Capini's jet, an ordinary piston engine drives a ducted fan, which pumps air out of a nozzle at the tail. Extra fuel can be burned in this airflow to boost the speed of the aircraft, but test pilot Mario de Bernardi was not impressed. The N1's maximum speed is barely 200 miles an hour, and its normal cruising speed is only 130 miles per hour. slower than it would fly if the engine drove only an ordinary propeller. The N1, as a result of years of research, yet its performance today was poorer than that of even trainers and transports. Part of its trouble is the size of the aircraft. The N1 is large and clumsy and has a wingspan of 52 feet, but the propulsion system itself is mainly at fault. So anyway, with that, I conclude my my bonus pictures for you.